Welcome, welcome. See, we are live here with our Facebook friends. Hello, everybody in the BtheNow family. We're back. We're going to get started in the next few minutes. It's not too late to get your folks out for this very lively and important conversation surrounding the Voting Rights Act and how it directly impacts your community and you, as I like to call it, a mature voter, a whole adult, right, out here in these voting streets. So we want to give you the opportunity, if you received the link by text message, please go ahead and take this time to forward that to friends and family. You can post it. We are streaming live on Facebook, on our Facebook page, BtheNow, so that we can have this conversation. This is where it all begins. And so we're going to get started in the next minute. I know people are still logging on. We thank you so much for joining us on this here Monday evening, also a holiday for many, for some, just another day. But we appreciate you joining us here. And so we're going to have the infamous DJ Jelly continue on for another minute as we continue and have people. Oh, I think we're looking at your screen, DJ Jelly, as we have folks log on and continue.
Not sure what just happened.
I think he's going to get us back on track. Momentarily. Yeah, there we go.
Perfecto.
Share the screen there. So as other folks log on, I do want to take this opportunity again to welcome you all to a BtheNow live forum. It is your first live forum. Then let me tell you, it is open, candid conversation. This is a safe space to speak your views, but more importantly, to have the conversation. We believe in the advocacy of politics as an everyday part of life. And being an avid community member, making our foundation stronger, just as, you know, community members, right? And so I won't give away the mission. I like to save that for the founder to be able to share with you all, but it's very important that we're stretched across the country here. I'm here in Texas. We've got pretty much every region represented because we know how important it is for us to lock arms and also be in a unanimous understanding of what's happening in the elections and, you know, and how to be a good voter and be a good citizen. So we have our board members, folks are logging on as we speak. So I don't want to get too far into it, but I also, for the sake of our very esteemed guests tonight, I do want to start promptly. And so with that said, guys, we will have our chat open. I'll be sharing some tips and points. Please feel free to ask any of your questions that you have for our guests. They understand that this is obviously an open forum and conversation. We want to address those questions and concerns that you've been waiting to ask folks like this in these particular positions so that you can understand the process. And tonight we're going to specifically be talking about this new act and how it impacts us as voters, particularly in certain communities. That said, I want to introduce to some, but probably not having to many, our founder, Mrs. Cheryl Neal.
Hey, Kay. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you guys so much for attending this evening. And I first want to, thank Kay because, she is a very busy individual. She's a leader in her own community, and she has given so much to BtheNow. She understands how important it is to get people educated on this whole political process. And she's just given everything she has to this cause. So I want to thank you, Kay, for all that you do. I also want to thank DJ Jelly for starting us off with some music. DJ Jelly is a legend, not only in Georgia, but internationally. And I always say that DJs are the heartbeat of our community. and they have a lot of followers, and those individuals, they listen to what they say. So it's a privilege for him to be on the call to start it off and to end it, and to get this information so he can take this information back to his followers and let them understand exactly what's going on. So thank you so much, Jelly. I appreciate you. And again, I appreciate everybody who is joining us on this call, joining us live on Facebook, because this is a very, very important topic. And that's why we started it off with our first speaker series on the Voting Rights Act, and how it's going to, and how it will impact us in our local communities, state, and on a national level as well. So with that said, I want to, tell you a little bit about BtheNow before we get started. Before I introduce our guest. So BtheNow came out of necessity in 2020 with so much stuff going on with COVID, and our protests and riots and unnecessary deaths, everything that was going on. It seemed like just the world was going crazy at that time. And so anytime I would have conversations with certain individuals and voting came up, I would hear people say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to vote. And I couldn't understand it at all. I was blown away. And at that time, I knew something had to be done. And so that's how BtheNow came about. And our whole goal, our mission, is to motivate and educate the community to use the power of their vote to make a difference. We feel that if you're educated and you're engaged and informed, you're going to take action. And that's where BtheNow comes from. Doing it right now, taking action right now. So before, what I would like everybody to do is, when you get a chance, go to BtheNow.org, the letter B, TheNow.org. Check out our site. Check your voter registration status. If you're not registered to vote, you can register on our site. And then also sign up to get more information on what BtheNow is doing in the community. You can text B, the letter B, the Now, to 55469 and get regular updates. So again, I do appreciate everybody for coming out this evening, and we're going to go ahead and move forward. And before I introduce our first esteemed guest, I want to just give you all some quick facts. In 2021, 52 restrictive voting laws, AKA Jim Crow 2.0 laws, were passed in various states across the country, limiting options to vote and undermining local elections. At the helm was Georgia's own Senate Bill 202 and Texas Senate Bill 1. In response to all of this nonsense, Congress introduced two voting right bills. The first was the Freedom to Vote Act, which would have solidified voter protection. Examples like making Election Day a national holiday, and then the early voting days, a minimum of 15 days. And then there was also the John Lewis Voting Rights Advanced Act, which would make illegal voting rules that discriminate on a basis of race, language, or ethnicity, and empower voters to challenge the discriminatory laws. Neither one of those laws were passed. So here we are tonight, still talking about the Voter Rights Act that came to pass in 1965. And so how did we get to this point? And the point where it has to be renewed consistently. It's unfortunate. And so that's why I'm excited about this evening and the first speaker that I'm going to introduce, because Sarah Gazal, she is the policy director and Minority Caucus of the Minority Caucus Georgia House of Representatives. And what's really important is she's currently the only Democrat on the Georgia State's election board. Now, I don't know whether to clap or to cry because the only Democrat on the board. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you all Sarah Gazal. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
It is a pleasure and an honor to join you here tonight. There's really nothing I like better than to talk about voting rights and to make sure that everyone is equipped with the tools that they need to cast a ballot. So I'd like to talk for a few minutes, if I may, unless you want to go ahead and introduce the other guests about the Voting Rights Act.
Yes, the other guest is Latanya Cruz, and she is currently city council member in the town of Capitol Heights, Maryland. She had an emergency, and so she's going to hopefully join us around the 8:30 mark to discuss from her point of view. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move forward with you, Sarah, to start. And, you know, as the topic states, you know, we wanted to discuss the Voting Rights Act, the laws that weren't passed, and how does that affect our local communities?
Well, unfortunately, you know, the Voting Rights Act, as you said, it was originally passed in 1965, but every 5 or 10 years it would be renewed. And in fact, the last time it was renewed unanimously. Nobody voted against it. And that was only about 15 years ago. But somehow we have moved to a point in our country where voting rights were absolutely sacred and upheld by everyone, to where it is now half of our legislators believe that their access to power are threatened by voting rights. So we've come very far in the wrong direction in a very short amount of time. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court has really stripped a lot of the power out of the Voting Rights Act as it was written. There are two areas in the Voting Rights Act that really made sure that everybody could still access their ballot in a way that was consistent, no matter what your zip code was. There was Section 5, which is the pre-clearance section, and that is the section that forced states that had a long history of discriminatory voting laws and practices, and they had to undergo what was called pre-clearance. And what that means is, in order to make any change in your voting laws or practices, you had to submit those changes first to a special department within the Department of Justice to make sure that they did not discriminate against any particular group of voters, particularly Black voters, because historically that is who these laws discriminated against. And it really operated on what's called the theory of non-retrogression. And what that means is voting rights should be a one-way ratchet. In other words, it should always bend with that arc towards justice. Voting rights should always become more and more accessible. And any practice or any law that further restricted voting rights would never have passed pre-clearance. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided that, oh, we're fine. States aren't discriminating anymore, so we're not going to force any particular state to undergo the pre-clearance process anymore. So they didn't eliminate the process itself. What they did was they eliminated the list of states that needed to go through it. And now they're chipping away at Section 2. And Section 2 is the portion of the Voting Rights Act where anybody can challenge a voting law or a voting practice that discriminates on the basis of race or religion or other protected category. In fact, just this past week, there was in my opinion, wrongly decided case where a judge said that, in fact, no private party can sue on the basis of a Section 2 violation. Only the Department of Justice has standing to sue. Now, that is counter to all precedent under Section 2. It is counter to the text. I don't know if it will be upheld, but if it makes its way to the Supreme Court, I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith that the Supreme Court is going to recognize the practice of decades and decades of voting rights and upholding them. So what that means is it really comes down to individuals at the state level, and we have to fight state by state and law by law, and really engage at every step of the way. And sometimes it comes down to the county, right? Voters have to be, we have to step up. We have to follow what's going on in our particular counties, follow what our local election administrators are doing, and make sure that everyone still has access to their ballot. And the number one tool for that is education, voter education.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, expand a little bit upon that, because people still don't understand how important it is at the local level. They think everything starts from a national level and then trickles down. Or, you know, like we've discussed this on a few other calls, that, you know, everybody is so excited to get out and vote during the presidential election. But, you know, they tend to pass over these midterms, you know, and this year is so critical to me, our democracy, that, you know, how just really explain why that is so important, especially on a local level, that people get involved.
Well, I mean, you can get down to the really local level, and just looking at voting rights and voting accessibility. In Georgia and in most states, it's the county that starts to set these processes and these policies. So it is your county commission that sets the budget for your local election office. And that is going to determine how many voting sites you have, how many early voting sites you have available to you, how well staffed your election office is, how many voting precincts that they'll open across your county, what hours they're going to have. And those decisions are made at your local election office. So people can go every month, or they can log in online and follow these meetings, but they're voting on their county commissioners. They're going to be on lots of ballots this fall. So that goes all the way down to the bottom of that ballot. And those are the people who are making the decisions that will determine how accessible your ballot is. And I am a huge advocate of local offices, like making sure if you have a district attorney on your ballot, or if you have a sheriff on your ballot, those are critical decisions in the justice system. Those are the people who are making choices on who to arrest, whether to prosecute, whether to try to set up diversion programs. So if that's your passion, if that is what gets you out, and you care about that, these are the people you need to be voting for. It's not your I mean, your governor is incredibly important, your congressman and your senator are incredibly important, but just as important are these local officials who really touch your life on a much more daily basis. So whether it's voting rights or justice or whatever, the education system, you need to care who you're voting for on your board of education. And you also have to pay attention to when that is. Like Gwinnett County, it looks like those in Georgia just last week, those are now nonpartisan elections. So those are going to be on the ballot in May. If you wait till November, you're going to miss out on that. So many of these races are determined in the primary as well, because now that our lines are drawn and so many of these seats are not very competitive, your local representation is really going to be decided in the primary. So you've got to make sure today that you are registered and that your registration is up to date, and you have your current address on there, and you know when you need to cast that ballot for that primary. In Texas, y'all are voting right now in Texas in the primary. And I know how challenging it's been for people who wanted to vote on absentee ballots. All the rules are changed so much in Georgia and Texas, so many other states. So knowing how to access that ballot, knowing what to do to make sure that ballot is counted. And everybody who is listening to this, you're the most important tool among your peers in your community. People trust what they hear from friends and family much more than they do from a postcard from a campaign. So everybody needs to come out of here tonight knowing what steps they can take to make sure that their community can get out there and vote.
Sarah, you're absolutely right. And thank you so much for that. And that's why we have these calls, because we truly want to do our part and just educate people as much as we can on whatever topic we're talking about. We just think if we give people a little at a time, then eventually they'll be, so educated enough to make an informed decision, to feel comfortable to tell others, to at least the first step is to get registered, and then to find out about who is actually running in their area, in their district, in their state, and on a national level, because it's going to affect everything you do. I always say voting begins, everything begins and ends with the vote. From, for what you buy at the grocery store, to the clothes that you buy, to where you live, everything begins with the vote.
Hey.
So, go ahead, Erica. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just curious. Thank you so much for that information. I never really knew about Section 5 versus Section 2. With Section 5, you mentioned the pre-clearance, and you said that the Supreme Court eliminated a lot of the states that have to go through that pre-clearance. I was just curious, are there any states that do still go through it? None at all.
No,
wow.
None at all. They just said, well, we're done. There's no more discriminatory behavior by the state, so let's not force any state to go through pre-clearance anymore. So, and that's what the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would do, is it establishes different criteria. Personally, I think every state should have to go through pre-clearance. I know that there are lots of states in the Northeast that have terrible access laws. New York has just recently changed some of their voter access. They didn't have any early voting at all. And a lot of states have much more restrictive absentee ballots. So stick them all through that process. I have no problem with that.
Thank you. Yeah.
If anybody else has any questions, please put it in the chat and we'll read them out for you. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about, your post on the Board of Elections? Exactly what does that entail?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I think it's going to entail a meeting in about 3 weeks, right after crossover day. So that's going to kill me. But in general, the state election board has two roles that are sort of complementary. First, we take the laws that the legislature passes, and then we create rules and regulations, because a law is generally not going to be specific enough for a county election board to. I have to apologize. My cat is. Every time I get on the screen, she's probably going to show up in just a second. I'm trying to push her out of the way. But so we pass regulations, we write and pass them so that the laws that the legislature passes can actually be implemented. Sometimes it's very practical, like how you implement a canvass process or reconciliation after voting, or what the polling place needs to look like, or what the rules should be for a drop box. And so that's half of it. The other half is adjudicating when somebody violates an election law or rule. So if we get a report that a county opened a poll late, there are investigators with the Secretary of State's office, they come back and they report back the complaint and then the results of the investigation, and we determine whether or not we think there was a violation. And if it looks like there was, we act more as like a grand jury. We send that case off to the Attorney General's office if we think it merits further investigation, or we can dismiss cases if we don't think there was a violation. Or in some cases, there was a minor violation, but it really doesn't warrant more than just a letter of instruction. So we know that there was a poll worker who didn't understand a certain process or procedure. That's not worth sending to the Attorney General's office, but they need a letter. Or a voter failed to update their address. They're still qualified to vote because they moved down the street. They're still in the county, but they didn't update their address. So that would merit something like a letter of instruction. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say we're both the lawmakers, but we do both the rulemaking and the adjudication side. Unlike some states, we do not have any authority to certify an election, though. Some states, the election board does. In Georgia, it is the Secretary of State who has the authority to certify an election.
Okay. As the only Democrat right now in Georgia on that board, do you feel like you have a voice?
I do, because up until this point, at least, everybody has approached the duties of the state election board in a similar way, which is we want to make sure that counties have the support they need, whether that's from training or guidelines or instruction to administer elections cleanly. And then with the adjudication, it's really about just applying the facts to the law. And it has been all attorneys. Now, half of the members have recently changed, and we haven't had any new meetings since then. So I can't speak to what I think it's going to look like going down the road. And there are some cases where clearly I'm out there on my own, especially the issues related to the county takeovers, which was written into SB 202, where the state election board can go in and remove a county superintendent. And I have been very clear about the fact that I think that is an inappropriate role for the state election board to play. If there are problems at the county level, then we need to involve a neutral third party like a judge. There are processes in place that have always been in place that we go and we can ask a judge to allow the Secretary of State's office or the state election board to oversee an election with a county, not replacing the county. And so I am on my own on that one right now.
Yeah, see that example right there, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating that people who were voted into office would actually do something like that. It was based on this past election. And can you give an example? So I'm just going to ask the question: if the election was held again, with these laws in place, do you think that based on the laws that are from Senate Bill 202, could that have been overturned? Could the results of the past election been overturned?
I don't think so. Now I say that because the only with this county takeover, this is all prospective, right? Mm-hmm. It would be to remove a board and run an election on behalf of that county. And so everyone knew all of the rules and all of the regulations by which the 2020 elections were being conducted. Nobody uttered a peep about having a problem with those rules and with those regulations until after the fact, until after that election had already been run, which just tells you that none of them were in good faith. I mean, it's talking about how a consent decree, which wasn't even a consent decree, but that and the Dropbox rules and all of that were problematic. Those were in place for months before the election. There were opportunities to contest them and nobody did. So it was never about the process. It was about the outcome. Full stop. And I mean, they tried through the courts, they tried through cheating, and none of it worked.
I know we have a couple of questions in the chat. Kay, can you read those?
Yes, we have first from one of our board members, Erica, here. What should someone do, or what process should they follow if they feel their voting rights have been violated?
Well, very simple. If you feel that your rights have been violated, then you can go to either your county election board or you can go to the state election board and you lodge a complaint. And you lay out the facts of what you think has happened, and there will be an investigation either at the county or at the state level.
how long of a process is that? Because let's just say, to me, there's going to be a lot of issues with this upcoming election in November. And so if someone feels that way and they actually file a complaint, how long will that process take?
Well, it's going to depend on who gets it, how seriously they take it. Quite frankly, it's probably better to work with an organization as well, like the ACLU, Election Protection. These are both nonpartisan organizations that help represent voting rights. They litigate for voting rights, but they will also help individuals pursue their rights to make sure that they have access to the ballot. I mean, the most important step, honestly, is educating yourself on what your rights are and educating yourself on what the rules that the new rules that you have to follow are. That is the single most important thing in protecting your voting rights, is equipping yourself with accurate information.
Okay.
We have another question coming in specifically to Georgia. Which elections will be held in May? I think one of the biggest things that people get really concerned or confused with some of the basic terminology of, I apologize, Sarah, you have a cat, but I have a toddler who insists on questioning mommy right when I have to unmute. But I think that some of the terms that we or folks that I wouldn't even say we, I consider myself a big lay person. When it comes to this, can get confused with, the primary or the national election, or, the ones that happen in this month and the ones that are happening this month. So what he's asking is about the elections that are going to be held, I guess, in Gwinnett County, down in Georgia in May.
Well, and it's not just Gwinnett. So every county across the state will hold what's called a primary election, which is that is going to be on the partisan ballot. That's where you choose who you want to represent the party for certain offices, and that can go from governor, although I've only seen one gubernatorial candidate on the Democratic side, and I'm very happy about that. But every other major almost every other major statewide office, we'll be selecting who we want to represent the Democratic Party or the Republican Party for that position. So you go in and you tell them whether you want a Republican, a Democratic, or a nonpartisan ballot in May, because there are also nonpartisan elections. These are not primary elections. So one of them is indeed the Gwinnett County School Board, which will now be nonpartisan, but also every judge that is running for office will be on that May ballot. And again, just like if you're worried about who is going to be your district attorney or your sheriff, your judges are just as important. And they are always going to be nonpartisan. So if you want to know who they are, you have to do your research as to who your candidates are. So all of these elections are going to be on the May ballot. And if you want to vote on that ballot, you have to make sure that you're registered 4 weeks beforehand, which is going to be the end of April. I'm sorry, I should have pulled up all those dates before I came, but I'm sure we can get that to you so you can send that out to all your listeners and followers. So that's the first opportunity that you have to determine who's going to make decisions for you. And then there may be a runoff in June. We don't know. It all depends on how close some of those if nobody gets 50%, then some of those will go into a runoff in June. And then who wins on those primary ballots will be on the ballot in November. So you'll have your Democratic candidates, you'll have your Republican candidates, and sometimes you'll also see Libertarian or independent candidates on there as well. But it's all a long process to kind of whittle it down to just a couple of people.
Yeah, you mentioned it, a long process. And again, I find it to be such a convoluted process for the average American, right? The average mom and dad person working. I mean, this is even before you put in the complications of I'm working this job or where I work or the dates that I have or the state that I live in or the county I'm in doesn't do early voting. So I've got that one day. And I'm going to tell you, it was very late in my voting understanding before it really dawned on me. And I don't know where I remembered it or how it happened. And I realized that I was missing probably the most important elections to me, right, as a citizen, which is, it's a no-brainer when you talk about school board, when you talk, now I didn't have kids back then, but I was a teacher. I knew it was important. I knew that my neighbors had kids and their quality of education and all these other things mattered about my safety. It mattered down to my property value. I mean, all of these things. I used to live in Maryland, and one of the things that, you know, judges, all of these things, your sheriffs and all of these things that your day to day versus that one big every 4 years. And I'm voting for a guy or gal that I don't know, can't even see how their policies trickle down to me. So I know a lot of it has to do with folks still kind of under, you know, this mirage that, you know, voting doesn't matter. And we're attacking that as much as we can, community by community. But I think a lot of it is really just education and knowing, right? It would be so much simpler if, you know, my friend here in DC and my friends here in Atlanta, her hometown in Omaha, and I'm here in Texas, we were all doing the same thing at the same time, just like we do nationally. And I wonder how much you believe is, we talk a lot about the education of it and the lack thereof, and how much of it is just meant to be, or, you know, is so convoluted of a process, you know, when you start to use different terms. I mean, I can't tell you how many people don't even know it, you know, they get confused with nonpartisan or this or that. And I just wish there was a way that we could make the whole thing super, super simple and maybe get it out more for people on a national level so that they don't miss probably the most important election of their daily life.
No, you're 100% right, and it's so frustrating. And that's actually a little bit of what the Freedom to Vote Act would have done. It wouldn't have set the same calendar for everybody, but it would have set baselines, right? There were minimum standards for every state, and that includes early voting for every state, free access to vote by mail. Right? Everybody, no excuse, vote by mail. Every state would have, and this to me is sort of the holy grail, is same-day registration. If you are eligible to vote, you should be able to go in and cast your ballot, even if it means doing it on a provisional ballot so that the county has time to double check your paperwork and make sure you're still eligible. That's fine. If you're eligible, you should be able to cast a ballot. You shouldn't have to go through these artificial month-long deadlines and all of that. And that's it's just so heartbreaking to me that we haven't been able, at least until now, to pass this Freedom to Vote Act, because so much of these differing standards and differing opportunities based on your zip code would have just been eliminated. And then it's much easier to message when everybody's got the same, everybody's operating by the same rules. But you know, it's just so hard. So I share your frustration, and unfortunately, I don't have a good answer except that, you know, it's on us. You know, we can't wait for somebody else to come in and do this job for us. We can't wait for national groups or somebody to swoop in and wave a magic wand and make sure everyone has all the information they need. We've got to take it on ourselves, and we have to share it in our communities.
Are you familiar offhand? I know it's a pretty vague question, but I know there are a couple of states that are similar. There's a specific question regarding Georgia and Florida having the same policy. I'm not sure if you happen to know, being able to vote outside of your registered party.
So actually, in Georgia, that's one real freedom that we have. So there is no registered party in Georgia. You go in and you tell your poll worker what ballot you want for that election. You don't have to pre-register, and the data is kept. so that candidates and campaigns and parties can sort of track how everybody votes and who they should be targeting and for with information. But you can switch. And in fact, a lot of people do. If you look at my voter record, you'll see in 2016, I pulled a Republican presidential ballot, thinking that because I knew that Hillary Clinton had the Democratic nomination sewn up by the time they came here. So I hoped to stave off a disaster on the Republican side. It didn't work, but a lot of people do that. Whereas in Florida, you have to register by party, and that is the primary ballot that you will get. It does not impact who you're able to vote for in November, because everybody gets the same ballot in November, but it does change what that primary ballot is going to be. And in fact, there's been a huge controversy. It's a real scandal that in some retirement communities, there have been volunteers going through and switching people's partisan affiliation. And that is actual fraud. That is voter fraud, because it changes the numbers, it changes everything, and these folks won't be able to vote in a Democratic primary anymore if they're not able to get that affiliation changed back in time to get their ballot. So, and let me tell you, nobody was switching people to Democrats.
Well, no comment. I don't want to. No comment. No comment there. Did anybody have any other questions? It is rumored that Georgia's primary may shift from May to July. What's your take on that, and what's the impact?
So my take on that is there is a judge right now who's actively considering that, because there is a Section 2 challenge to our redistricting. We're losing a majority Black, or at least a currently Black congresswoman. My congresswoman has been drawn out of her district, and the district has changed dramatically. So it would change our congressional makeup in Washington. So and also some of the state districts, although I haven't looked closely to see whether it's the Senate or the House. It's probably the Senate districts, state Senate districts, because those are quite egregious. A court is currently considering whether or not they should postpone the primary in order to give time to redraw these districts in a way that would adhere to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. I don't know. I don't want to speculate whether this judge, which way he'll decide, and I am quite confident that there will be an immediate appeal. And our, unfortunately, the district, the appellate district has not been known to be particularly friendly to voting rights. So if I were a betting person, I would bet that we're still going to see this happen in May. Unfortunately, it's going to be incredibly challenging for the counties to actually get it done, because we still have some of our local district lines that haven't even been drawn. I just saw earlier this evening that down in Chatham County, where Savannah is, if you're not from Georgia, it looks like a couple of folks are trying to overturn what the local county commission and the local school board have done. So it's a hot mess. It really is. Part of me hopes that they do postpone the primary, just so that our counties can get these district lines done right, so they can reassign voters and make sure that voters have the proper ballot that they're supposed to have. Because if they don't, if they mess it up, they're going to have to run an election again. And seeing that after all of the big lie of 2020, and people have already lost so much faith in our election system and our actual election integrity being undermined because these maps are so late, and because nobody's willing to cut any slack to our county election officials. I'm concerned about that, I have to say.
So Sarah, I did want to circle back real quick about the John Lewis Act. Basically, those two laws that I had spoke about earlier. Do you see any light of day with either one of those acts?
I
or
think
laws?
there may be aspects of them that get passed. I think they're sort of more narrowly drawn parts of the bills that may get passed. The ones that would really open up voting rights and make sure they're super accessible, probably not. The other parts that I think are incredibly important, but unfortunately I think will get blocked, are some that deal with campaign finance, that would stop all of this dark money going into major campaigns, and that would force disclosure so we know who is spending millions of dollars trying to either get a candidate elected, or get a bill passed, or get a judge. I mean, there are millions and millions of dollars in dark money that go behind judicial nominations, precisely so we can see the results that we've seen right now. All of that would have been eliminated, but that to me is the most heartbreaking, because that to me poses the longest term damage and undermines our democracy more than anything else. It's this flood of dark money that I think unfortunately is going to stay, because the dark money is still so powerful on everyone. But I think maybe a few pieces here and there. I think section 2 especially, it's just so egregious to not be able to challenge clearly discriminatory laws and clearly discriminatory district lines. So we may see a few pieces here and there.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Sarah? Are there any in the chat?
We don't have any in the chat, but if anyone else had any, this would be a great time before we begin to kind of close out and have any closing remarks. State Representative Derek Jackson, you're free to go ahead and unmute yourself if you wanted to ask it yourself, or if you'd like me to.
You know, I always like to be on the front seat when Sarah is providing some invaluable information, especially around voting. So Sarah, my question is around, just for our audience, if you can provide your thoughts with, Republicans right now, and BtheNow is nonpartisan, but when you think about some of the legislation that they're trying to push, is to make these elections nonpartisan. Can you provide some perspective, especially from an election board, what our listening audience should think about when they hear someone of either party taking elections from a partisan to a nonpartisan status?
Oh, absolutely. And I think so. You have to put it in context of what else has been happening. So in Gwinnett County had a long tradition of being an incredibly Republican county, but it happens to also be the county that has had some of the most rapid change demographically of any county in the country. It truly has changed dramatically. And what that means is local elections finally, the changes finally showed up, even though the maps had been designed to entrench one political party in power. That flipped because the demographics flipped. So now there's a Democratic controlled county commission, there's a Democratic controlled school board. But remember how we talked about, because these are nonpartisan elections, therefore those elections, that voting is going to happen in May and not in November. Well, voters in May look very different from voters in November. Voters in May are voters who are people who never miss an election. They're people who they tend to be older because they're retired. They have a much longer history of voting. I often try to compare voting to exercise, or it's like a muscle. So you have to exercise it until just do it over and over and over again. You just got to get those reps in. so that you strengthen that muscle so that you can do it without thinking, and then you never miss it. And that's what voting is like. So the people who turn out in May tend to be older, they tend to be more conservative. And so it's just a really different group of people than vote in November. You've got younger voters in November, people who don't always vote in every single election, people who don't have the time or the bandwidth to do the kind of research and homework that they need to do to know who they're voting for, to know where to vote, to know how to get all of that. Because there's a much bigger push from campaigns. There's more money out there to inform voters. There's just been some research. There was a study that came out last week that just said the most effective way of getting people out to vote is just reminding them over and over and over again. And that is successful. But it doesn't happen in May. It doesn't happen for the primaries. So you don't have the same people. So you very likely will have a different outcome, even though it's the same voter base. You've got 20% of your voters coming out to vote in May, and that's generous, as opposed to 50, 60, 70% of your voters who are going to turn out in November. So you've got a minority of a minority selecting who's going to be on that, who's going to win those school board seats in May versus everybody in November. Now, if they were to move these elections back onto the November ballot, which is how they used to do it in Georgia, that's a whole different conversation. Personally, I think if these elections were in November, I have no problem with nonpartisan school board elections. There are other seats that I think are even more important to be nonpartisan. Clerk of court. I mean, come on. Why? That's when I really don't understand why our clerk of court is a partisan. I mean, it's really that. How are you going to do your job differently in managing court papers depending on your partisan affiliation? I don't know. There's got to be a story behind it that I just don't know. But that's that. I think, does that answer your question, Representative? The dynamics and why they did that. They did it so they could flip the school board.
No, absolutely, and it precipitates to other areas too. And 71% to that same study that you're referencing, Sarah, 71% of the public, they would like to know the individual's party affiliation, because with that party affiliation, a set of values typically comes with them. And so it's important to know why is it now in this day and age you want to shift a lot of the election seats to a nonpartisan race when Democrats, especially at the local level, to your point, Sarah, is now in control. My last question, and I'll go back to mute, is this, going back to, and for our listening audience, these things that we're talking about is not just Georgia specific, right? I mean, these very tactics is parlaying into an overall strategy across the United States. It goes back to Cheryl's opening remarks when you think about all the bills that were very similar to Senate Bill 202. It didn't just happen in Georgia. It flooded across the United States. And so you should not, for those who are in Tennessee, for example, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, it may start in Georgia, but these pieces of legislation that Sarah is referencing is happening across the United States. With that being said, going back to if Georgia's primary shift to the right from May to July is what has been rumored, and we probably will hear the judge's ruling sometime this week, possibly. There's a certain amount of education, right? Organization like BtheNow could certainly feel to educate the public, one, that this primary has moved, Sarah, can you provide, the other impact when we move a primary? Because this won't be the first time a primary moves into July in the state of Georgia. But another impact when you think about Senate Bill 202, Sarah, will be the runoff. So if the election primary happens in July, since we're in the South, y'all, if the primary happens in the South in July, guess when the runoff is going to be, Cheryl? In August. It's going to happen 4 weeks after, right? When families are thinking about taking the children back to school starting, right? It won't be 9 weeks like it was prior to Senate Bill 202. And so there are other impacts, Sarah, I think we should bring to light. This is a domino effect because it impacts runoff, it impacts your absentee ballot, it impacts everything that our voting system touches. So it's not simply just shifting the date from May 24th to a date in July. It impacts everything.
You're absolutely right, and it's cascading, as you said, and the biggest impact really is on those military and overseas voters, because they are the one group of voters that still has the right to apply for their absentee ballot well in advance. They need to receive it 45 days out, so they get those ballots in September for the November election. We don't anymore. Now they don't send those out until basically the beginning of early vote, but those voters are going to be working on a much more compressed time frame, and they need to get those ballots back from all over the world. Luckily, there is electronic delivery for our military and overseas voters. If they choose, they can receive their ballot electronically. They can get it emailed to them. Still have to print it out. They still have to mail it back. They have to mail back a hard copy. There's no way to email a ballot back. That's just not done under Georgia law. Some states do that, but most don't, because it's an election security issue. So you're right. You're absolutely correct. If they push off that primary, it's just gonna compress everything, and it's a domino effect. I mean, we saw it in 2020, and what was really concerning was just all the tremendous amount of voter confusion, because they just didn't know what was going on.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I know I went to mute the back, but since you mentioned military and being a retired naval officer, I believe the Secretary of State, Sarah, put some parameters into where the website, if you're stationed in Germany or outside of the continent of the United States, the firewall will not allow for you to access the Secretary of State website. I believe that was another change.
If that is the case, then let me know, and I will bring that up with the Secretary of State's office. Luckily, this is one area where the federal government does have some pretty standard. There's the UOCAVA, is the Uniform Overseas Military, and it's a uniform code for anybody who's in the military or who lives overseas. And you can use these federal forms. It's called a federal postcard application, where you are both registering and applying for an absentee ballot all in one fell swoop. So if you happen to know anyone who is in the military or who is overseas, have them re-register every single time. That's the only way to be absolutely certain. Use the federal postcard application. You don't have to worry about the Secretary of State's website. You can just go to the FVAP, I think, .gov, and you will always be able to access that, and they are required to accept that. And then you can get every ballot for every election, and it's, like I said, you can register for electronic delivery. It will be emailed to you as soon as it's available. And that's one of the great examples of why having these federal standards is so important. It doesn't mean that it's not a federal takeover of an election. It's a baseline. It makes sure that everyone can access that ballot in a way that's fair and standardized, and it doesn't matter. Your rights don't depend on your zip code.
You're absolutely right, Sarah. And Sarah, I would like to personally thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and educate us about what's going on, not only here locally, but on a national level, and how the Voter Rights Act is, is affecting us in our communities. It's so important. So thank you so much. And, with that said, listening to what Sarah was saying, and then, people asking questions and her answering them, people are trying to make, and have always tried to make, the voting process difficult. We understand that. We know with all these particular laws being passed, it's to put up roadblocks. So people will be frustrated and just say, you know what, I'm not even going to waste my time to register or get to the polls because, nothing's going to change for me. We have to make sure that way of thinking is thrown out the window. We have to make sure that each of us take responsibility for our own selves and our own circles, and make sure we become educated, and that we share that with our friends and family and have them do the same thing. Like that, you can take that network marketing approach, or however you want to call it. But it's just, this is too important for us to just stand on the sideline. The main thing we have to do is we have to make sure that everybody on this call, everybody that we know, is registered to vote. Mm-hmm. So you check your registration, and then it has to get to a point where you're checking it maybe on a monthly basis, because people are being purged as we speak. And so you may think you're registered. You may think you're ready for these upcoming elections, whether it's May or November, and then you realize that you're not. So that's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is to educate ourselves on who's running in our local elections, state, and on the national level. We have to make sure we do our research to figure out who are those individuals who truly have our best interests at heart. You look at the case in Minneapolis, unfortunately, with the cop shot the young gentleman, killed him, and the judge gave her 2 years for taking a life. That judge was either voted in or whoever was voted in appointed her to that position. So again, we have to take the power back and start doing, our part in it. It's not going to come to us freely. And thirdly, as I always said, you got to tell your circle and get them involved. And then we start the process all over again. This should be voting. This whole process should be up there when, as my good friend Hank Stewart would say, paying your bills every month, or whether you're going to the grocery store. It's something that you should think about consistently, like air, like breathing, like eating, because that's how important it is for us right now. That's how important it is to the next generation and the generations to come. Because I always say this, there was a point in time in the late 1800s where we had African-American males who were in the Senate, who were in Congress, they were making decisions. So I say, what happened from that time up until the fact that we had to have the Civil Rights Movement, or the Voting Rights Act had to be passed in 1965? What happened? They changed the laws, period. And that's what's happening right now. They're changing the laws, and it can get to the point, if we're not involved, that we can see ourselves going backwards. So that's why this call is so important to me. And we're going to continue to have these type of calls once a month as we get closer to the elections, the election cycle in November. And we're going to start having these calls probably twice a month, or maybe weekly, like we've been doing, because we have to get this information out there by any means necessary. And so we feel like if we consistently have these calls, then each one will tell one. So again, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. DJ Jelly is going to take us out. But one thing would be now that we always say, we want everyone to be educated. We want them to be engaged. And we want them to be informed, because that means they're going to take action and be the now. That's what it stands for, taking action right now. So Jelly, if you can hear me, please take us out and actually tell everybody where they can find you as well.
Oh, you already know. Thank you, Cheryl. Hey, you can find me at The Real DJ Jelly, IG, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok. And on V103 each and every Saturday and Sunday evening, 8 to 10. And I appreciate everyone that's called. Cheryl, you know, nothing but love from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Sarah, thank you for your time. And everybody else, we'll see you in a month. The next call is Erica. Our next call will be the 21st of March. Thank you all so much. Jelly, take us out.